We're getting back on track here with Kathryn and Emily, but as you know, we won't stay there for long because this is the Going Off Track podcast. And welcome to the first episode of F101 on the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Kathryn and that's Emily. And the F101 series is going to be us explaining all about F1 to you when we're not in a race weekend situation. And this week we are going to talk about F1 and give you a quick and dirty rundown if you are brand new to the sport and you're just listening because you like us, of who is driving, who is talking on TV, who are the important people around the sport, and why we like them so much, or maybe not. But mostly why we like them all so much.
I don't know. There's some that we don't like, but we'll talk about them all anyways. It's important to know everybody, I guess. Everyone's included. Exactly. Awesome. So Kathryn, tell us, where are you podcasting from today? It looks similar to last week.
Yeah, I might be sitting about 3 inches to my left compared to where I was last week, but I did just come back from hiking in the wilderness with a bunch of our older campers, including spending a night on the same beach where I opened up Instagram and discovered that AlphaTauri had replaced Nick DeVries with Danny Ricciardo. Those are two names, and we will go into that a little bit more later, but I was on that beach yesterday, at the time of recording, yesterday morning, and made that discovery. There was no big Formula One news yesterday when I woke up, but we shall see what comes during these coming weeks as we are in silly season, the summer break. Emily, what about you? You are definitely recording from somewhere new.
Yes, I have a new background. I am in Argentina again, so I'm back home in Buenos Aires. I'm in my house, in my office / now podcast studio, I guess, which the acoustics are terrible, so I'm probably gonna have to find a new place. I'm just gonna bounce around my house until I find a good place. But back in Argentina, so not super happy to be back in winter, but happy to be home. So.
Yeah. Oh, also to note that we recorded a later episode while you were still in the States, so you will be hopping back to your previous background in next week's episode, and then we'll be back in Argentina for good for a bit.
Oh, yay, that'll be fun. I know, I'm just gonna keep everybody guessing where I am. It's like, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, but where in the world is Emily podcasting from?
Exactly. All right, so diving in, F101 is the basics of F1, and you can't get any more basic than the drivers and teams. And one of the reasons why I personally love Formula One so much is that it is so easy to keep track of all the major players. There are 10 teams, there are 20 drivers, there are a number of every team obviously has a team principal and relevant race engineers, but there are only a handful of those that are the ones who make a big splash in the media and the ones that do most of the talking in reference to the sport. So it's very easy to know who everyone is and to pick up on who everyone is relatively quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I like about it too. In the NFL and in basketball, you have, NFL, you have a bench of, or a roster of 54 people generally, and plus you have your practice squad and whatever. And NBA, you can have 15, but there's so many teams, there's so many people to keep track of. Someone, subs in, it's who the heck is this person? You have second strings. And you just, half the time you don't know who's on the field, who's playing. F1, you have 20 people to keep track of. Pretty easy, pretty simple. Until people start losing their seats and new people start showing up, but that's all part of the fun as well.
Exactly. And to make it even easier, some of the support races in Formula One, they have, the same chassis, the same engine, but in Formula One, you have every team gets to make up their own car, their own engine. Fortunately, there are only 4 engine suppliers that you need to worry about, and these are relevant when a team that is being supplied an engine either does really well or does really badly. You will kind of know based on who their supplier is for their engines, which ones are the problem, and they tend to all kind of, if one engine supplier is having a good weekend, that all the teams with those engines tend to be having good weekends, and when they're faltering, it's also the same. So there are four. We've got Honda Red Bull powertrains, which I'm sure you can imagine who they power. You've got Ferrari, you've got Renault, and you've got Mercedes. And as we go down the line for each team, we will tell you who their engine supplier is, if it isn't obvious.
Exactly. Perfect.
We'll introduce the teams and the drivers in the order of the current drivers standing, or the current constructors standing. So there are two sets of standings that you need to worry about. The drivers' championship, which is the individual drivers, which Max Verstappen is currently leading. And there's also the constructors' championship, was the teams that construct the car. Anyway, so first things first.
Yes. So currently in first for constructors is the Oracle Red Bull Racing. And for those of you who are not familiar with F1 or have not really watched a race, the current drivers are Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, or you'll hear him be called Checo. That's his nickname. I don't think I've ever called him Sergio, ever.
Never.
I always call him Checo. That's kind of weird to say that. But those are the two current drivers. Max Verstappen, if you are in F1,
If you live
you
under
know
a rock.
who he is. If not, you might know who he is. But he's currently leading the drivers' championships. He's won all but 2 races this year. He's doing pretty well.
Yeah, Checo won the other 2 races. Red Bull hasn't lost a race since the 2022 season. And with the way that their car is designed and the way everything has been going, there's a chance that they're just not going to lose a race at all this season. And we've got 10 races to go once we come back from the break.
And Kathryn loves Red Bull.
Yeah, that's my team. And yeah, like I said in our intro podcast, I took one look at the battle between Verstappen and Hamilton and said Verstappen's my guy, and that's my team. And yeah, I like it, and we're winning, which makes it even better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love Red Bull, but it would be kind of cool to see one team win every race.
Yeah.
In one season.
Yeah. And also to add for relevant personnel, there are a few relevant personnel on the pit wall for Red Bull. There's Christian Horner, who's the team principal and is the only team principal they've ever had. Side note, he's married to Ginger Spice, so that's why you're going to see Ginger Spice at some races. She's there for a reason, and it's called She's Married to One. And then there's Helmut Marko, who is head of the Red Bull Driver Development Program and is the reason for basically all of the Red Bull and AlphaTauri drivers you see today, and he's been in that advisory role since 2005 and is pretty brutal if you're watching this and you know F1 already and you know what happened with AlphaTauri this year, or if you watched our red flag rundown about the change at AlphaTauri, you'll know that Helmut Marko takes no prisoners. And then there's also GP, who is Max Verstappen's race engineer, and you will hear him on the pit wall telling Max to watch his tire degradation or other things that Max is or isn't doing, and Max will just sass at him the entire race, and it's gotten a lot of social media entertainment, especially after what happened at Spa last week.
Yeah. Also, side note, did you see Helmut Marko's comments about him and Max? How
Yes.
during the summer break, he's like, "Oh, they're gonna go on an island for a few days together. That's my understanding, and I'm a mediator. I'll be here if they need me. I'm only a phone call away," or something like that.
Yeah, it was
he's just a
hilarious.
G. I love Helmut. I think he's the perfect mix of take no prisoners, extremely cutthroat, but also fluffs it with extreme humor and can make some jokes here and there. I don't know. I think he's a great character and a great F1 personality. So
Agreed.
that's
So
my take on
second,
Helmut. But
yeah. Agreed. So second in the championship standings is currently Mercedes AMG Petronas F1 team, which if you have watched any of Drive to Survive, you'll know that that team name is the bane of Lewis Hamilton's existence. He is their lead
And
racing
Toto,
driver.
none of them can
And
say
Toto.
it.
Yes, you're right. The Toto too.
I was like just gonna say, Kathryn, I think you got that on your first try, and like no one else who's actually on the team can get it on their first try. So congratulations.
Legitimately, because I am reading it off of our rundown document. It's not because I have it actually memorized. But yeah, so we've got Lewis Hamilton. The other driver is George Russell. Toto Wolff is the CEO and team principal of Mercedes. And he is also a fan favorite team principal on the grid, known for things like his viral quote at the 2021 Abu Dhabi GP, and also for his Darth Toto black turtleneck moment at the end of season 4 of Drive to Survive.
Yeah, Toto, I mean, Lewis is great. George is whatever, but I love Toto. Absolutely love Toto. Such a character. Like, listening to him on the intro on this season of Drive to Survive, and he's like, I think we all have targets on our back. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Toto, yes. Like, it's just like that thick accent that he has and just his delivery. And I love it. I loved him and Horner fighting last year in the team principal meeting. That was amazing. I absolutely love Toto. I think he's amazing. And he's kind of collecting like wayward lost boys, I feel like, as well, and then trying to turn them into good drivers. So he's kind of picked up Mick Schumacher, who left Haas last year, or I guess was dropped by Haas last year. He's now the third driver for Mercedes, and Nick DeVries, who was with AlphaTauri this season, is like in talks with Mercedes, allegedly. They had lunch in Monaco, so who knows, but he kind of, fixes the broken toys and makes them into better drivers again. So
yeah,
he's an interesting guy.
Yeah, and then Lewis is basically one of the greatest drivers in the history of Formula One, right up there with Michael Schumacher, who is Mick Schumacher's father. He's got a ton of wins, a ton of podiums. He's set a ton of Formula One records. He's noted for his rivalries with, current driver Fernando Alonso, former driver Sebastian Vettel, and of course my favorite former driver that I've never actually seen drive a race, Nico Rosberg, who beat Lewis Hamilton in 2016 in equal machinery and will never let anyone forget it, literally ever.
Ever. Never, ever will anyone ever forget, ever. He, for those of you guys who watch the U.S. broadcast, which is really from Sky Sports, he will sometimes be like a guest presenter, and somehow he manages to bring up that he drove with Lewis and beat him, like in every single broadcast. It's so good. And something else to point out about Lewis is that if you do watch a race, you'll find Lewis will just say things randomly to try and call attention from the stewards, and it gets old really quickly. It's entertaining, but it's funny because it sounds like someone's like parent is or like some kid is tattling on the other kids in the playground to the parents. And now that I've said that, when you watch a race after the summer break, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. Taking us back to the race in Austria, it was Checo went off, Checo's tires were off, Checo was out, why isn't he getting a flag, why isn't he hitting track limits? Every single lap on quarter, I think 9 and 10, every single time Lewis was on the radio calling him out. But so Lewis is very active on the radio.
Very active.
And
then the last
George
person,
thinks that it's...
Yeah, and then there's George.
Oh, and then I was going to say, and then there's George. George.
George is he just came on to Mercedes last year from Williams, which is not a strong team in comparison. And George just thinks that every single idea he has is the right idea and the right plan and the right thing that the team should do.
Yeah. He does provide a lot of comic relief on the radio though. Sometimes he's a funny one. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I highly suggest that you look into the is it rain or is it sweat. I can't remember what race it was, but that was from this season. George thought it was raining, but he was just sweating profusely. So there's that. Classic George. But
Yeah.
anyway, so moving on to our next team.
Before we move on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but no, before we move on, we just have to highlight Toto's wife, Susie Wolf, who is the current managing director
my
of the
queen.
F1 Academy.
My queen. Yes. How could I forget about Susie? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Susie, if you are hearing this. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
Please come on our show.
She's not directly tied to. She's not directly tied to Mercedes, but like she is. So
I mean, she
Susie,
is by the married thing. She was a development driver for Williams, and was kind of the closest we've seen to a woman on the grid since the 70s.
Yeah, she's just an all-around badass. Like, I'm obsessed. She's the coolest person, I think, in F1. She's leading the F1 Academy, which, for those of you who don't know, is the all-women's driving, which is now partnered with F1, so the teams will have kind of more connection with the F1 Academy. And she's really promoting women in motorsport, starting in karting, at for young girls and having them grow in the motorsport world like they do for, men, which is really cool. I think she's awesome. Yeah, and she's married to Toto, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and she sometimes posts videos of Toto diving off yachts while naked.
I don't know if he was naked or if he had like a light pink swimsuit.
It could have been a micro mini. He is European.
I don't think she would post something like that. Because, I know she was far away, but she's still close enough to where I feel like it could be in dangerous territory. You know what I mean?
A little bit. Anyway.
I don't know. Anyways, moving on to the next team in the standings, we have Aston Martin Aramco Cognizant. I can never say that word. Cognizant F1 team. And they are supplied by Mercedes. So they don't actually make their own engine, but Mercedes does. So that's what we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast, how there's 4 constructors that supply engines. Mercedes supplies Aston Martins. So driving for Aston Martin, we have Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. And I feel like we have a lot of comments on this one.
just a couple. I mean,
so Fernando Alonso's he's one of my favorite drivers personally. He's a Spanish driver. He has flair to him, let's say that. He's not a British driver. And he tends to cause some chaos on the track. Especially last year with, I think it was in Austin, him and Lance, who is now his teammate, was not last year, got into a kind of a big...
Oh, yeah.
Flying.
Yeah. There was a big flying
not
incident.
crash, but there was a flying incident. But no, he is very decorated. He is a 2-time world champion. He's driven for many of the teams. He's had 100 podiums. He got his 100th this year.
And then he
in the
didn't get it, and then he got
season,
it back.
which is pretty cool. I know, and then he didn't, and then George had his trophy and then was gonna mail it to him. But yeah, I really like Fernando. I think he's settling into his role as the old man driver of the team, even though he's still doing better than Lance. But
yeah.
Then you got Lance.
Yeah, Lance is he's obviously a good enough driver to have been in Formula One for a long time. But what he is most known for is being the son of the part owner and executive chairman of the Aston Martin F1 team, Lawrence Stroll, who, if you've seen any bit of Drive to Survive that has anything to do with Lawrence and what Aston Martin was prior to its current incarnation as Aston Martin, which we will go into a whole a whole video of whatever happened to Force India, which turned into Racing Point, which turned into Aston Martin as we know it now. And we all joke that he gives Fernando a bonus every time Fernando says something nice about Lance during a race.
Yeah, because like historically, he was not necessarily the nicest guy on the grid, like super competitive, very much in his lane. And this season on the radio, it's like, oh, tell Lance that was a really nice move on this corner. And tell Lance I'm at this setting and it's really helping me. Maybe it'll help him. And it's just a very different Fernando, but we're convinced that Daddy Stroll is paying him to help Lance and be nice to him.
Yeah. And Lance also broke both of his hands and one of his feet in a training accident before the 2023 season, and we didn't actually know if he was going to be ready to race in Bahrain, but somehow he managed it. And I don't understand how he did, but that is when you have every available medical piece of technology available to you, you are able to get yourself ready and back in a car in less than 2 weeks after breaking lots and lots of bones.
And you say training, he was on a bike. He was cycling.
Yes, he was cycling. This was not like a vehicle accident.
Let's throw that. Yeah, it was not like he was hitting a car. He was riding his bike.
Yeah.
Poor guy. But yeah, if you've never listened to an interview with Lance, highly suggest it. It's a great 3-4 minutes of entertainment. I feel bad for the kid. I mean, he's a really strong driver, and like you said, obviously, if he wasn't good enough, he wouldn't be in the seat. Fernando is out driving him this season, but you never know. I mean, I don't know. I'm waiting for the day when Stroll, like Daddy Stroll, has to kick Lance out of the car and get someone else, but I don't know if that'll actually happen. I don't know if he's ruthless enough to do that. So.
Yeah, he's ruthless everywhere else, but I don't know if he is in the case of with his son.
Yeah, I don't know.
We'll see. Next in the standings is Emily's team, Scuderia Ferrari, who supply themselves with their own speedy Ferrari engines that sometimes explode. But we've got their drivers, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and their team principal, Frederic Vasseur, who was formerly the team principal at Alfa Romeo. And then also of note, and also because he's been in the news lately, is their former team principal, who is currently not on the grid, but is a fan favorite, is Matteo Binotto, and we just love him and hope to see him return soon, which may actually happen. But Leclerc is a 5-time race winner. He finished second in the Drivers' Championship last season. He is cursed in his home race at Monaco, and we both personally think that, even though Ferrari considers him to be their lead driver, we just don't think that, like, talent-wise, he's just not quite there yet. He's also a very young driver, and as of today, August 2nd, the rumor is he has signed his contract extension with Ferrari, which totally tracks that they would want to keep him around for a while, especially while they move through their growing pains of figuring out how to make their strategy actually work and not explode in their faces mid-race and make everybody bring out those clown show memes.
Go without a strategy?
Yeah, maybe. He has significantly more pole position victories than he has actual race wins, and it'll be interesting to see how his career progresses. And then his teammate Carlos Sainz, he was a former member of the Red Bull Junior team. He's been with Ferrari for a couple of years now. We feel that he doesn't get the respect he deserves or the credit that he deserves in the car. And he is definitely the most likely to leave Ferrari when his contract expires, or if some team wants to buy out his contract. That is something that we can definitely see happening in the not too distant future, especially, potentially moving to Audi when Audi joins the field in 2026.
Yeah. Ugh. I hate talking about Charles and Carlos because it makes me so upset. Because we all know that Carlos deserves more respect than he's actually getting. Yeah. Poor guy.
And Ferrari being, one of the top tier teams in Formula One ever, should be better than where they are now, but they it's been a long time since they've seen success.
They're a little lost right now. They need some help getting back. But yeah, I mean, if you've been watching this season at all, or if you're just getting into it, it is like blatantly obvious they favor Charles over Carlos. They'll pick Charles better times than Carlos. Like if they're right there, it's really frustrating to watch, but it's fine. It's totally fine. But anyways,
Yeah.
moving on to the next team we have here, McLaren F1 team, and they are also supplied by Mercedes, and their drivers are Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and they're the big notable non-driver here is Zach Brown, who is McLaren's CEO. So if you watch Drive to Survive, you know who Zach Brown is. If you know about the Oscar Piastri incident, which happened a year ago today.
Yes, a year ago on August 2nd.
You will know who Zach Brown is. Very, very, or if you've been, watching the Hype to Vegas, he's been challenging Toto and Christian Horner to like fights and races. That would be Zach Brown of McLaren. But
Yeah.
going back to the drivers, Lando Norris, we have another British driver. He has raced with McLaren his entire career. So he came up a few years ago, started with McLaren, still with McLaren, and he's contracted with McLaren for a few more seasons, I think through 2026.
I think it might be 25, but it could be 26.
25? Okay. Yeah, so for a few more seasons here. He's a notable one to watch possibly for next silly season or the next for possible movements. I know Helmet's been talking about him as well as some other teams. He is a hot new driver. He's very, very good kind of in the midfield. In our recent history, McLaren has not been known as a top team, but Lando's
Other
kind
than
of been
these
at
last
the top
couple
of that.
weeks.
I know. Well, yeah, other than these last couple of weeks, but Lando's pretty much been the top of that midfield kind of pack of drivers.
Yeah, exactly.
Next, we have Oscar Piastri, who's just such an interesting guy to talk about. He's an Australian driver, so he took over the seat of Daniel Ricciardo last season, so they replaced one Aussie with another. And he's the one who kind of not created, but there was a lot of drama last silly season about Alpine saying that he was going to drive for them because he was their reserve driver when Fernando Alonso left Alpine, and then he came out and said, no, I'm not. And then a little bit later, Oscar ended up driving for McLaren. So this is the whole Oscar Piastri fiasco is actually covered in our F101 silly season episode that we are going to be releasing next week.
Yeah, next week.
Next week. Thank you, Kathryn, for clarifying. And we really go through like the day by day, hour by hour breakdown of what happened last year with Oscar Piastri. But him and Lando both drive for McLaren this year. They've got a really, really young team this year with those two drivers.
Yeah.
And also a notable thing to say about Zach Brown, he has a tattoo of the Monza track on his arm because he lost a bet with Daniel Ricciardo. And I just love this because of what they did to Danny. And now it's like forever on his body and he has to remember Danny every single day.
Yeah, exactly. So the next team on the list is the BWT Alpine F1 team. They are the only Renault supplied team on the grid. They used to be the Renault F1 team, and they are currently an all-French team with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, who are the best of friends. They've got along well this year, mostly because the major storylines with Alpine are that they have a portion of the team itself has been purchased by a group that includes Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. who recently bought the Wrexham football team in the UK, and also by the fact that they just fired their team principal, Otmar Safnauer, who was the team principal at Aston Martin, had been at Alpine for about 18 months before Alpine decided to go in a different direction. Gasly he spent most of his career at AlphaTauri, other than starting out at Red Bull for a little bit, which didn't necessarily go well. He ended up getting replaced by Alex Albon, who is currently at Williams, but we'll touch on them in a minute. And Pierre is known for his epic bromance with his former teammate Yuki Tsunoda, which is just the most adorable, wholesome thing that you've kind of ever seen.
I love Yuki and Pierre's friendship, and I love how they highlighted it last season on Drive to Survive. It was really cute. So.
Yeah, it was great. And then next down the line is Williams Racing, which was one of the most historic racing teams on the grid. They're right up there with, McLaren and Ferrari. They're not doing as well as we would like to see a team of this, with this history. But they are on, I feel, an upswing. They're a Mercedes supplied engine. They have a very close tie with Mercedes. Toto Wolff, the team principal at Mercedes, likes to bring his own drivers to get some experience in a car at Williams, and you saw that with George Russell's career. He was a young Mercedes driver, and Toto really put him in a Williams car to get him experience before moving him to the Mercedes team. Right now, you have Alex Albon and Logan Sargent as the two drivers for Williams. Sargent is the first American driver to get a racing seat since the aptly named Scott Speed, who raced in 2007. And it was his participation in last year's FP1 Young Driver Sessions that gave him enough time in an F1 car to get his super license points, so that he could drive this season. Alex Albon raced for Toro Rosso, which is now AlphaTauri, which is soon to be someone else. And then he was on Red Bull for a while and then left Red Bull when Red Bull decided to give a seat to Checo Perez. He's doing really, really well at Williams. It's wonderful to see him in a car. He withdrew from Monza in 2022 because he needed to get his appendix out, and somehow was able to race in Singapore 3 weeks after having major surgery that did have some complications that were a little touch and go, apparently, which was a little scary.
Is insane.
Yeah,
that's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was talked about enough last year. All that they talked about was like, oh, Nick DeVries is going to step in.
Yeah, so the story behind that is Nick DeVries stepped into that open seat for Monza and he scored, and Nicholas Latifi, who was the other Williams driver at the time, he didn't score, which is basically what guaranteed DeVries a seat on the grid in 2023. For about 11 races, and we'll get to that once we talk about AlphaTauri. But we also cannot stop talking about Williams without talking about their brand new team principal, James Vowles, who is beloved on the grid. He is known for, he used to be a race engineer or chief strategist at Mercedes. He is known for the Valtteri It's James radio communications when Valtteri Bottas was driving for Mercedes, and he was usually the bearer of bad news to enforce team orders, which is when if Bottas was driving ahead of Hamilton, when they would make the driver switch places. And he joined Williams before the season. He's really into tech and strategy, and we love how much he's into tech and strategy, and we can listen to James talk about tech and strategy all day.
It's honestly the most entertaining thing this weekend for Spa, with there being rain during, free practice 1 and quali, but then for the sprints it was a little different weather. It was harder rain, and then for race day it was completely dry. They asked James, so how does this play into strategy? He's like, oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad that you asked. And then he went into a 20-minute deep dive. And my dad was like, they couldn't find anyone else better to talk on TV. I'm like, Dad, this is James. Like, you don't understand. This is amazing.
This is what he does.
This is his thing. This is why he's here. And he's, whenever it's a James weekend and not like a Zach weekend, I get really excited. So
yeah. I mean, it's also almost even more exciting than a Christian Horner weekend. And, you know, it's always fun when Horner's on the grid because it's all about, you know, the battles between Perez and Verstappen and, you know, what is Verstappen going to do? And, you know, Verstappen getting testy with GP and all those fun things.
Yeah, no, it's good. But no, we love James from Williams. So our next team that we have is MoneyGram Haas F1 team, and they are also supplied by Ferrari. And so quick side note here, whenever something is going wrong with like all of the Ferrari cars, which is more times than we would like, the Sky Sports team of presenters will always point out like, oh, they're all Ferrari cars, interesting, and they always put them down. They always talk down to Ferrari, and I feel like they're extremely biased against them, but it's my little tangent.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, just a little bit. But so your drivers for Haas are Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg. So in comparison to the McLaren team, which is super young, kind of, you know, up and coming drivers, I would say this is one of the more seasoned teams. K-Mags or Kevin Magnussen, he's one of my favorite personalities, I think, because he gets a little hot-headed on the radio. If you do watch Drive to Survive, he smashed Gunther's door, which is just a great moment. He left Formula One for a season, but then actually got called back when Mazepin was let go. Mazepin is Russian and had ties to oligarchs, or his dad had ties, his dad had ties. His dad was a big sponsor for Haas, which is how he kind of got the seat. And so during the Russia-Ukraine war, when that was first starting, he was let go as a driver, and they called K-Mags to come back and drive for them again.
It also should be added that Mazepin was also not a very good driver, so it wasn't like he was this great, you know, leading driver for Haas, who was let go because of the war. He was also let go for not being good, and Haas, which the other important part to know about Haas is an American team. It is currently the only American team on the grid, and so an American team couldn't really have ties with somebody who had major ties to Russia and the Russian government and everything that is going on with that. So that is one of the reasons why Nikita Mazepin was let go, and I think he's now living his life as a DJ.
Why does everyone like quit their life and become a DJ? I don't understand. Like,
hey, Nicholas Latifi is going to business school.
I was gonna say we should bring up that Nicholas Latifi is now getting his MBA. So good for you, buddy. Good for him. So your other driver is Nico Hülkenberg, and this poor guy, such a, you know, seems like a friendly guy, I don't know, but he holds one of the most unfortunate records in F1. He has the active record for most races without a victory, and that's 191 races. Yeah. So he's been in the sport for a long time, been on the grid driving for a long time, but has never actually made a podium, let alone victory. His best finish has been 4th place. So, and I had really high hopes for him in Spa.
So high.
At least with the sprint, I was like, this has to count. But yeah, he unfortunately has never really cracked that mid-tier level of driving. And then last but not least for Haas is, next to Toto, he's my favorite person in F1. And that's Gunther Steiner, who is their team principal. And and he has just he's been the only team principal at Haas since the start of the team. He's amazing. Like, I could say so many things about him, but we'd be here for an hour and a half. If you watch Drive to Survive, or if you don't, plug for Drive to Survive. It's such a great show. It really helps kind of like put all this together. But he's always calling the owner. And my dad asked, so I got to watch 2 races with my dad. And my dad was like, oh, that's the guy that is always calling the other guy. And I'm like, yes, that's it. That's Gunther. So he's always calling Gene Haas, who's the team owner, when anything goes wrong or if something goes good. He's like, oh, I have to call Gene. Oh, Gene's not going to like this. So I love that dynamic. It's really funny. But he's quite a character. And his book just came out last week, I think, or this week. Surviving to Drive or something like that. But yeah, I kind of want to read it.
I need to read
honestly.
it. I need to read it, I think. So
I want the
audiobook.
I want the audiobook of him reading the book. That's what I want.
Please. Yes. So next up on the team is Alfa Romeo F1 Team Stake, which is a Ferrari supplied team. They are also referred to predominantly by one of the Sky Sports pundits, Ted Kravitz, as Sauber, which is the original team name that they are going to be going back to because Alfa Romeo is leaving this current team, but their drivers are Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Bottas is a Finnish driver. He is the most Australian Finnish man you have ever met. He is always in Australia if he is not racing or following his girlfriend around the world. She's an Olympic rated cyclist. He's a 10-time race winner with about 67 podium finishes, and has been featured naked in photos many times on his social media account, including an autographed picture that he gave to his former teammate Lewis Hamilton. And then there's Zhou Guanyu, who is the first Chinese driver to compete in Formula One. And unfortunately, by virtue of the fact that he is in the number 9 team on the grid, you really don't see just how good he is as a driver. What he is probably best known for is, unfortunately, his car flipped multiple times in Silverstone 2022. The car flipped maybe two times before it got caught between the tire wall and the fence. But it was featured in Drive to Survive about 800 times, even when they weren't covering Silverstone, which is kind of awkward. But he's very good. He's kind of like that next Formula One fashionista, right up there with Lewis Hamilton, who was also very well known for his fashion choices.
I was gonna say, Zhou, he is like taking the cake this season. Like, he's killing it on the fashion game. Huge props to him. His style is great. Lewis kind of like, I don't know, goes off the deep end sometimes, but
he makes some bold choices.
Yeah, Zhou Guanyu does too, but they're very tasteful. So yeah, I appreciate his style. So yeah. Okay, so moving on from Alfa Romeo, we have Scuderia AlphaTauri, which is supplied by Honda Red Bull Powertrains. So they're kind of like a sister team of Red Bull. And next season, they're going to be allegedly working more together. Racing. Yeah, well, yeah, Hugo Boss Racing, but they'll also be working more closely with Red Bull to develop the car. Historically, AlphaTauri's been kind of a mid-pack car, and this season it's just not performing well at all. They are last in the constructors standing with their drivers. So at the beginning of the season, they had Yuki Tsunoda and Nick DeVries, but now their seats are Yuki and Daniel Ricciardo. So if you caught our red flag rundown, we talked all about how Nick lost his seat to Danny. This is the team Scuderia AlphaTauri, or just AlphaTauri. And Nick is no longer driving for F1. Danny took his seat. So this is one of the Helmut Marko cutthroat moves that we were kind of talking about earlier. So even though he is with Red Bull, he does kind of advise for AlphaTauri as well. So Yuki is from Japan, and he has only driven for AlphaTauri. I think we mentioned this in one of our earlier episodes, but I always think of Yuki as like a second-year driver, and he's been driving for like 4 years, 5 years,
Something
maybe?
like that. It's been
Something
a minute,
like that,
honestly.
but I just constantly think he's a new driver, but he's not. But he has only driven for AlphaTauri. That is the one and only team that he's driven for. He's also known for his extreme radio rants and calls. If you watch it again on the U.S. Broadcaster Sky Sports, you will see half of what's on the screen is just expletives that they can't actually show on the screen because he's yelling the F word or shit or something that they can't display, and it's just pure profanity, and it makes me so happy because he's probably like 4'11", and it's just like this tiny itty bitty little guy just yelling on the radio. Like, that's how I imagine it in my head.
Yeah.
And then we have Daniel Ricciardo, Danny Rick, lots of nicknames there. Honey Badger as well.
Honey Badger.
But he is one of my personal favorite drivers. He was the Red Bull third driver at the start of the season. Now he's on loan to AlphaTauri to replace Nick DeVries. He's won several times in his career, so he is an established driver. It's not like they, found him out of nowhere. But yeah, so those are the two current drivers for AlphaTauri. Oh, yeah. Then
Franz Tost, the team principal, who is outgoing after this season. Then Ferrari announced that their sporting director, Laurent Mekies, is just left the team after Spa, and he is going to be taking over as the team principal for AlphaTauri starting in 2020.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So those are your 20 drivers and your 10 teams.
Yeah.
Super easy to keep track of.
Yeah, and we've got 3 more people that you need to know about. There are actually a lot more people to know about, but the most important people of these Sky Sports presenters, if you're watching in the US or you're watching in the UK, or you're watching anywhere on ESPN, ESPN is contracted with Sky Sports to basically piggyback off their broadcast. The 3 people to know are David Croft, known as Crofty, who does race commentary, Martin Brundle, who also does race commentary and analysis, and also does our beloved grid walk, and then Ted Kravitz, who is their presenter down in the pit lane, who, when things are happening in the pits or if a driver has to retire because of damage or any other reasons, he's going to be the one giving insights because he's basically standing outside the team garages as these races happen, and they're also fan favorites, and they're very well known within the sport. There are a number of other pundits that come on from race to race depending on where in the country they are. You'll see Danica Patrick at a lot of the US based races, or the ones on the American side, US, South America, Canadian side of the world. You've got Nico Rosberg, who will chime in. You've got a few former drivers, a few drivers from other series, who will chime in from week to week in the pre-race commentary or the post-race commentary. But for the quick and dirty, you just need to know about Crofty, Martin, and Ted.
And just to plug the pit walk, like, there's nothing like watching a race, just the first 5 minutes before the race, just so you can catch Martin just roasting people. If you have any sense of humor whatsoever, highly suggest this. I was talking to my dad about it. He's like, that guy is brutal. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, it's awesome. I'm like, I know. You could only get away with this stuff as in Britain. Like, you could not get away with it if it was like an American presenter or doing this.
Not.
It's only okay because it's a British presenter on a British telecast. Like, it's so good. It's my favorite part of the race. I mean, I like the race, but it's just like humor-wise, it's amazing. But
yeah, exactly.
I digress.
It's wonderful. We love it. We've also been talking about this for 50 minutes. So we are going to call track limits on ourselves, and let you all
Waving
go back
the
to your lives.
Yes. We'll wave the checker flag and we will end this. So I am Emily.
And I've been Kathryn.
And thanks for going off track with you guys. We'll see you next week.